My name is Oliver. I was 35 years old, and I thought I had finally found stability when I joined my father's small business. For years, I had worked in a corporate job that drained me of every ounce of life. The pay was fine, the office was polished, and people respected the title on my desk. But every day, I felt like I was walking through a cage. My father used to call me late at night, telling me that he was getting tired of handling the business alone. He said he needed a partner, someone who could help him carry the weight. At first, I ignored his requests because I believed that leaving my job would be foolish. Still, one evening, after another long meeting where my boss yelled at me for something I had not even done, I walked out of that glass building and decided that enough was enough. I handed in my resignation without a second thought. Everyone told me that I was crazy. My colleagues laughed, my friends shook their heads, even my own mother asked me if I was making a mistake. But my father smiled for the first time in years when I told him. He clapped my shoulder and said, "Welcome home, son." The shop was small, nothing compared to the offices I was used to. Wooden shelves, a counter that squeaked when you leaned on it, a storage room filled with dust, but it smelled like life. It smelled like honesty. My father walked me through the books, the suppliers, the customers who had been with him for decades. He said, "This is not just a business, Oliver. This is our name. This is our legacy." For the first year, I worked harder than I had ever worked in my life. I woke up at dawn, opened the shutters, greeted the customers, balanced the accounts at night, and I did it with a strange kind of joy. My mother began to look at me with pride. My father stopped complaining about his back pain because he felt lighter with me around, and even the old customers noticed how energetic the shop had become. For the first time, I believed that I was building something real. But time has a cruel way of testing dreams. The second year brought storms I was not ready for. Sales began to dip. Suppliers raised their prices. The new supermarket in town stole half of our loyal customers. I tried to bring in new ideas, discounts, delivery services, even online advertising. But my father resisted every change. He said, "This business survived for 30 years without fancy tricks. It will survive now." I wanted to argue, but I stayed silent out of respect. Then the whispers began. I heard them first from our suppliers. They asked me quietly if we were still good for payment. At first, I laughed it off, telling them of course. But then I noticed the hesitation in my father's eyes every time I asked him about the accounts. He avoided my questions. He changed the topic. He told me to focus on the customers instead of the numbers. One evening, I walked into the office and found him staring at a pile of papers with his head in his hands. When he noticed me, he quickly pushed the papers into a drawer. I asked him what was going on, but he only said, "Nothing you need to worry about." I wanted to believe him. I told myself that he was just tired. Weeks passed, and the tension grew heavier. The fridge in the back stopped working, but we did not fix it because the money was short. The shelves grew emptier. Our accountant called twice about unpaid invoices. My mother grew quieter at the dinner table. And then came the breaking point. One morning, a man in a suit arrived at the shop. He looked around with cold eyes and then asked for me. He introduced himself as a representative from the bank. He handed me a letter and said, "Your payments are overdue." I stood frozen. Payments. I had no idea what he was talking about. My father came out of the back room and his face went pale when he saw the letter. He quickly grabbed it from my hands and told the man that it was a misunderstanding. The man left with a warning that if things did not change soon, there would be consequences. I stood in silence. My father avoided my eyes. Later that night, I asked him directly, "What is going on?" He raised his voice, something he had not done in years, and said, "You are the reason this business is failing. Ever since you came here, things have gone downhill. You brought your new ideas, your modern nonsense, and now the shop is drowning." His words cut me deeper than any wound. I had left everything behind for him. I had sacrificed my career, my comfort, my life. And now he was blaming me. My mother tried to calm him, but she did not deny his words. She looked at me with sadness, as if she too believed that I had broken something sacred. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My father's voice echoed in my mind. "You are the reason." I wondered if maybe he was right. Maybe I had been foolish to think I could save the business. Maybe I had only made it worse. But then another thought crept in. If I was truly to blame, why did the bank letter come as a surprise to me? Why had he hidden it? The next day, I searched the office when he was not around. I opened the drawers, the cabinets, even the locked box that he kept under the desk. What I found turned my blood cold. Stacks of receipts, bank statements, supplier bills, all showing the same truth. The business had been in debt long before I arrived. My father had been taking loans quietly, signing papers without telling anyone, and now the hole was too deep. I held those papers in my hands and felt the world spin. He had lied to me. He had lied to all of us. And now he was trying to throw the blame on me. That evening, I confronted my mother first. She lowered her eyes and admitted that she had known about some of the loans. She said your father promised he would handle it. I asked her why she never told me. She said because family must protect each other. Her words felt like chains around my chest. Protect each other. Or protect the lies. When my father returned, I tried to talk to him again. This time he shouted louder. He said, "You will not question me. I am your father. This is my business. If you do not like it, then leave." I looked at him, and for the first time in my life I saw not a father, but a man who was drowning and pulling everyone else down with him. I did not answer. I turned and walked out of the shop into the cold night. The decision before me was heavy. I could walk away and let everything collapse, or I could fight for the truth, even if it meant standing against my own blood. The decision was heavy before me. I could stay silent and keep the family together, or I could speak out and risk breaking everything apart. Either way, nothing would ever be the same again. I sat in my room that night, staring at the ceiling. The silence was so deep that I could hear the sound of my own breathing. Every time I closed my eyes, my father's words echoed inside my head. "If you tell anyone, you will destroy this family." The sentence cut through me like a knife. I wanted to believe he was trying to protect us, but deep down, I knew he was protecting only himself. Morning came, but it did not bring peace. I avoided my father at the breakfast table. My mother asked me to pass the bread, and I forced a smile. But inside my chest, there was a storm. Daniel scrolled on his phone as usual. Nobody spoke about the truth. Nobody looked me in the eye. It was as if the secret had built an invisible wall between me and the rest of them. I went to work, but my mind was not there. Every client, every paper, every task blurred into background noise. I could only think of that folder in the study and my father's cold warning. By evening, I felt exhausted, though I had done almost nothing. I walked home slower than usual, dragging my feet as if every step pulled me deeper into quicksand. That night, I tried to distract myself with old music, but the songs felt hollow. I tried to write in my diary, but my words tangled. Finally, I stood in front of the mirror. I looked at my reflection and whispered to myself, "Michael, what are you doing? Are you going to live your whole life in silence?" The face that looked back at me did not answer. Days turned into weeks, and the burden grew. I noticed my father locking his study more often. I noticed strangers visiting the house when my mother was not around. They spoke in low voices with him and left quickly. I knew these were the men connected to that property deal. Each time they came, I felt my stomach tighten. One evening, while my mother was at her sister's place, I overheard a conversation between my father and one of those men. I stood near the staircase holding my breath. The man said, "Don't worry. The papers are clean. By the time your family knows, it will be too late." My father laughed. That laugh still haunts me. Cold, confident, careless. I almost walked down and shouted at him right there. But fear held me. Fear of his anger. Fear of losing the little home we still lived in. Fear of breaking my mother's heart. So I climbed back up quietly and shut my door. But inside, I knew something had to change. The breaking point came a few nights later. My father returned home late. He smelled of alcohol. He slammed the door and shouted Daniel's name. I rushed out of my room and saw him holding Daniel's phone in his hand. "You useless boy," he roared, "spending time on this nonsense while I work to keep this house alive." Daniel looked terrified but said nothing. I wanted to stay silent, but my chest burned. "You're lying," I shouted before I could stop myself. My father's eyes snapped toward me. The room froze. "You didn't keep this house alive," I said, my voice shaking. "You sold it. I saw the papers. I know everything." For a second, the world stopped breathing. My mother gasped. Daniel looked from me to our father in disbelief. My father's face turned red. He stepped closer. "Shut your mouth," he hissed. But the words had already escaped. The truth was out. My mother's hands trembled as she asked, "What is he talking about?" My father tried to dismiss it. He said I was imagining things, that I was jealous of Daniel, that I always wanted attention. But I had the diary. I had written every detail. I ran to my room, grabbed it, and threw it on the table. pages filled with notes, dates, and copies of what I had seen. My mother read with wide eyes. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Daniel muttered, "This can't be true." But my father stayed silent now. His jaw tightened. His eyes burned with rage, but his lips refused to defend him. The silence was his confession. That night our family shattered. My mother cried until her voice was gone. Daniel locked himself in his room. My father paced like a caged animal. And me, I sat outside, staring at the dark sky. I felt both lighter and heavier at the same time. The secret was no longer only mine, but the cost of revealing it was destruction. Morning brought no healing. My father refused to speak to me. My mother's eyes avoided mine, though I could feel her broken heart in every step. Daniel refused to come down for breakfast. The house felt colder than ever before. Still, I did not regret it. For the first time I had spoken. For the first time I had not allowed my father to bury the truth, but the consequences had only begun. A week later, men returned to the house. They demanded my father finalize another deal. They spoke openly in the living room, as if we were invisible. My mother cried again. Daniel shouted at me, saying it was all my fault, and I realized that my father's betrayal had set us on a path we could never escape. I knew then that silence had never been the real prison. The prison was the illusion of family we were forced to protect, and now that illusion was broken forever. Yet deep inside, I still hoped. I still wanted to believe my mother could heal. I wanted to believe Daniel would one day understand. And I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, I had done the right thing. Because sometimes the truth does not save you immediately. Sometimes it first burns everything down. Only later, if you are strong enough, can you build something new from the ashes. And that was the moment I decided. No matter how hard it became, no matter how much it cost, I would never be silent again. No matter how hard it became, no matter how much it cost, I would never be silent again. But silence was not the only battle. What came after was even harder. The house that once felt heavy with secrets now felt heavy with anger. My father walked around like a shadow. His eyes burned whenever they met mine. My mother's tears dried on her face, but her silence cut deeper than words. Daniel looked at me as if I had ruined his entire life. The evenings were the worst. We sat around the table, but there was no laughter, no conversations, only the clinking of spoons against plates. My father ate fast and left. My mother forced every bite, as if food itself had turned to stone. Daniel scrolled through his phone in frustration. And me, I sat in the middle of it all, wondering if this was what truth was meant to do. One night, I heard my parents arguing in their room. My mother's voice cracked. She asked him how he could betray us. She asked him why he hid everything. He shouted back, saying it was his right, his decision, his life. Then came silence. The kind of silence that follows a wound too deep for words. I pressed my ear against the wall and felt my heart shiver. For the first time, I realized my mother was broken in ways I could not fix. She had built her entire life around loyalty to my father, and now that loyalty was being crushed under the weight of his lies. The next morning, she avoided me again. Not because she hated me, but because every time she looked at me, she was reminded of the truth I had unleashed. I had become the messenger of pain. Daniel confronted me that evening, his eyes red with anger. He said, "You should have kept quiet. You've destroyed everything." I wanted to explain. I wanted to tell him that silence would have destroyed us anyway, but the words caught in my throat. He slammed the door and left before I could say anything. I walked to my room and sat by the window. The street outside looked calm, almost peaceful. Children were laughing. Neighbors were talking. The world moved on as if nothing had happened. But inside my chest was a storm that refused to end. Days passed. My father became more distant. He often left the house without telling anyone. Sometimes he returned late at night smelling of alcohol. Sometimes he didn't return until morning. My mother stopped asking questions. Daniel stopped caring. And me, I watched the family crumble piece by piece. Then something happened that shook me again. I was at work when one of the men I had seen before came to meet me outside. He smiled in a way that made my skin crawl. He said, "Tell your father to stop delaying. If he doesn't keep his word, there will be consequences." I froze. Consequences. The word echoed in my head like a warning bell. When I asked what he meant, he just smirked and walked away. My hands trembled the whole way back home. That night, I confronted my father. I asked him what kind of deal he had made. He ignored me at first. But when I pressed harder, he snapped. He shouted that I should stay out of things I didn't understand. He said I was weak, useless, and foolish. His words hit me harder than any slap. But I did not back down. For the first time, I looked him in the eye and said, "No. You are the one who destroyed this family. You are the one who betrayed us. Not me." The room went silent. My mother gasped. Daniel stared. My father clenched his fists, but he did not speak. He turned and walked out. His silence was louder than his rage. That night, I lay awake thinking about what those men had said. Consequences. I wondered if we were in danger. I wondered if my father had gotten involved with people darker than I could imagine. I wanted to protect my mother. I wanted to protect Daniel, even if he hated me. But how could I protect anyone when I barely understood what was happening? I decided to dig deeper. When my father left for work, I sneaked into his study. I searched through the drawers, the shelves, the cupboards, and then I found another folder. Inside were receipts, large amounts of money, loans taken from men whose names I did not recognize. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. It was worse than I thought. We weren't just losing the house. We were sinking in debts tied to dangerous people. I felt the ground slip beneath me. This wasn't only about betrayal anymore. This was about survival. When I showed the papers to my mother, she broke down again. She whispered, "What will happen to us?" I didn't know what to say. I wanted to promise her that everything would be fine, but I had no answers, only fear. Daniel refused to believe it. He said I was exaggerating. He said father would fix everything. But I saw the truth in my father's eyes. He was trapped, and by extension, so were we. The following week, things escalated. Men started coming more often. They demanded payments. They shouted at the door. My mother locked herself in the bedroom. Daniel started staying at his friend's house. And me, I stood at the center of the storm, trying to hold everything together. One evening, when the men left, I found my father sitting alone in the living room. His shoulders slumped, his face pale. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. He wasn't the monster of my childhood in that moment. He was just a broken man who had lost control. He looked at me and said, "Michael, I never wanted this." His voice cracked. I waited for an apology. I waited for him to admit his mistakes. But all he said was, "Don't tell your mother the rest." The rest. The words made my stomach twist. How much more was he hiding? I walked away without replying. My chest burned with anger, fear, and sadness all at once. I knew then that this was not the end. This was only the beginning of something darker. And deep down, I realized one thing. The family I had been trying to protect was already gone. What remained was only a fragile shadow. And soon, even that shadow might vanish. The days that followed felt heavier than ever. Every morning I woke with the same thought. What else is he hiding? What else has he done? The men kept coming. Sometimes they banged the door so hard the walls shook. Sometimes they just left a paper, a warning, a number written in bold. My mother refused to eat. Daniel refused to stay. And I refused to give up. I decided I could no longer wait for truth to come out on its own. I had to pull it out. One evening when my father was not home, I sat with my mother. Her eyes were swollen from crying. I held her hands and said, "Mother, we cannot keep living like this. Tell me everything you know. Please." She shook her head at first, but then slowly she spoke. Her voice trembled. She told me about small signs she had ignored, extra trips my father made, strange phone calls in the night, money missing from their account. She admitted she had known something was wrong, but she had been too afraid to question him. She thought loyalty would protect her, but loyalty had only chained her. I listened in silence. My chest burned with anger, but I did not blame her. I blamed him. That night I stayed awake again, my window open, the cold air filling the room. I stared at the papers I had found, the debts, the receipts, the shadows written in ink. My father was drowning us, and if I did nothing, we would all be dragged down with him. The next morning I went to Daniel. He was angry at me, but I did not care. I told him everything, every detail. He cursed, he shouted, he said I was lying. But when I placed the folder in his hands, his face changed. His eyes widened. He sat down without a word. Finally, he whispered, "What do we do now?" For the first time in years, I saw him not as the golden child, but as my brother. Scared, lost, human. We agreed on one thing. We had to confront our father together. That evening when he came home, tired, his shirt loose, his eyes dull, we stood in front of him. I placed the folder on the table. Daniel crossed his arms. My mother stood in the doorway watching. I said, "No more lies. Tell us everything." At first he tried to laugh it off. Then he tried to shout. But when neither worked, his voice broke. He told us about the debts, the deals, the promises he could not keep. He admitted that he had sold the house long before the papers reached me. He admitted that he had borrowed money from people he should never have touched. He admitted that he was trapped. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of his words crushed the air around us. Finally, my mother asked, "Why?" Her voice was so soft it almost disappeared. He looked at her. His lips moved, but no sound came, and then he whispered, "Because I wanted more." That was the truth. Simple and cruel. He wanted more, and in wanting more, he lost everything. Tears filled my mother's eyes. Daniel turned away. I felt my chest tighten until I could barely breathe. After that night, things changed. Not suddenly, not magically, but slowly. My father grew quieter. He no longer shouted. He no longer pretended to control us. He spent hours sitting alone, staring at nothing. My mother began to speak more. Not about him, but about herself. About the life she had lost. About the strength she thought she never had. Daniel stayed close to me now. He no longer looked at me with anger. Instead, he asked for advice, for help. We were brothers again. The debts did not vanish. The men still came. But now we faced them together. We spoke to lawyers. We went to the bank. We found ways to protect what little was left. It was not easy. It was painful. But it was honest. And honesty, for the first time in years, gave us a kind of peace. One evening as I sat in the study, the same study where I had first found the papers, I opened my diary again. I wrote about the journey, the lies, the betrayal, the truth. I wrote about pain, but I also wrote about survival. And then I wrote one final line. Family is not about silence. Family is about truth, even when it hurts. That night I closed the diary and felt lighter. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. The scars will never fade. My father will never be the man I once wished he was. But my mother is stronger now. My brother stands with me. And me, I am no longer the silent son. I am the voice that will never be quiet again.